Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into something complex, often pretty messy. The intersection of marriage, money, and power dynamics.
Right. Specifically, how courts deal with those really one-sided agreements.
Exactly. How do courts actually unravel a marital agreement that looks like it was signed under, well, emotional pressure? Our mission today is to cut through the noise and get you straight to the legal steps for challenging a contract based on what the law calls undue influence.
And to really get this, you need a very specific analytical approach. It's not just about hurt feelings.
No.
We're talking precise legal tests. We'll first figure out when a marriage becomes more than just a relationship in the eyes of the law, when it becomes a confidential relationship.
Okay.
Because that label, that's the key. It flips the script on who has to prove what. The burden of proof shifts. Then we'll break down exactly what you need to show to prove undue influence, or, more importantly in these situations, how the dominant spouse fails to disprove it. We'll use Francois v. Francois as our main guide here. It's a really illustrative case.
Okay, let's unpack that first piece. So we have agreements between spouses, people who supposedly trust each other. Does the law just automatically assume, okay, marriage, potential undue influence problem, like if I marry someone much richer, am I instantly protected? What's the core concept we need to define first?
Yeah, that's a common misconception. The key idea is this confidential relationship. And the general rule, maybe surprisingly, is that just being married doesn't automatically create one legally.
Ah, okay.
The law kind of expects spouses to influence each other. That's normal. A confidential relation, legally speaking, is different. It's very fact-specific. It arises when one party places confidence in the other with a resulting superiority and influence on the other side.
Superiority and influence.
That's it. One spouse's will is essentially dominating the others. That's the first hurdle you absolutely have to clear. You need to show that dominance existed.
Right, makes sense. It needs proof of actual dominance, not just, everyday persuasion or an influence. So to see how courts figure this out, let's dive into Francois v. Francois from 1979. The facts are, well, they're pretty stark. Rich, older guy, younger woman, lots of money changing hands.
And what's fascinating is how the court looks at the whole history, the small things over time that build up to show this legal dominance. It wasn't just one event.
Okay, let's analyze Francois v. Francois. First, what are the legally dispositive facts? What actually happened that showed this power dynamic shifting?
All right. So Victor was 50, financially solid, owned 2 big properties, Lillian guns plus stock. He marries Jane, who's 30, and brings basically nothing financially to the marriage.
Okay.
Over about 4 years, the court found Victor transferred major assets to her. Started with joint bank accounts, then the big one, the misgunsed home, worth about $107K back then, and even stock in his family's private companies. The record says it was often because she just kept at him badgering emotional pressure. But the real kicker is the final agreement. This thing basically signed away almost all his remaining liquid assets.
And then how did that happen?
Jane and her lawyer, a guy named Monasun, sprung it on Victor just 2 days after she'd secretly filed for divorce. He had no idea divorce was even on the table.
He thought they were working things out.
Exactly. He signed it even though another lawyer, Gregory Ball, who was supposedly representing him, told him point blank it was financial suicide. Victor signed because he was led to believe by Jane that this was the only way to save the marriage.
That context is just devastating. Signing away everything based on a lie about reconciliation. Given all that, what was the core legal issue the appeals court had to decide?
The precise legal question was, did Jane Francois use undue influence over Victor to get him to sign that property settlement and separation agreement? And if so, was the lower court right to just void the whole thing and undo the property transfers?
Okay, before we see how they applied it, what rule of law did the court use? Can you state the full rule for voiding an agreement due to undue influence when there's a confidential relationship and break down its testable parts?
Sure. It's a 2-step rule, and it really hinges on who has to prove what the burden of proof. Step 1. The court has to find that a confidential relationship existed. This means showing one party was clearly dominant, the other subservient, like we discussed.
Right, the dominance factor.
If and only if that's established, the burden of proof flips. It immediately shifts to the dominant party, Jane in this case. Step 2. The dominant party then has to actively disprove the presumption of undue influence.
Okay, how do they do that?
They have to show 2 specific things, and with clear and convincing evidence, which is a high standard. First, A, that the agreement itself was substantively fair, and second, B, that the weaker party, Victor, got independent and genuinely helpful legal advice.
Clear and convincing evidence on both fairness and independent counsel. Got it. That burden shift is definitely where the case turns. Now for the court's elemental analysis. Let's take it step by step. How did the court apply that first element, finding a confidential relationship?
They looked right at the marriage history. The court said the record was, and I quote, replete with instances where Jane got what she wanted by badgering Victor into submission.
Wow, replete.
Yeah. And remember, early on, Victor had already given her control over finances. That showed his complete trust and reliance on her. So the court's conclusion was pretty straightforward. Jane was the dominant partner.
And the legal effect of that finding?
Huge. The moment the court labeled her dominant, the pressure was entirely on her to prove the agreement was legitimate. Victor didn't have to prove she manipulated him anymore. She had to prove she didn't.
Understood. So the burden flicks to Jane. She now has to prove this very lopsided deal was fair and Victor had real independent advice. Let's focus on the concept of undue influence itself and how Jane failed to rebut that presumption.
Right. So undue influence, legally, is the subversion of another person's free will to get them to agree to something. It's influence that makes the victim act against their own best interests.
Subversion of free will.
Exactly. To fight off the presumption that she did this, Jane needed to prove those two things, fairness and independent advice, and the court found she failed dramatically on both counts.
Okay, let's zero in on that evidence about fairness and the independent counsel. This is the two-part rebuttal she failed. How did the court deal with the fact that Victor did technically talk to a lawyer, Judge Ball, and how did the terms themselves stack up regarding substantive fairness?
She completely failed to rebut. First, fairness. The court didn't mince words. It said the terms were hardly fair. And having Attorney Ball call it financial suicide, that became pretty powerful evidence that it wasn't fair at all.
Okay, so fairness was out. What about the advice part? That seems trickier since he did see a lawyer.
This is critical. The court called the whole attempt to give Victor counsel a charade.
A charade. Strong word.
Very, and here's why. Jane's lawyer, Morrison, set up the meeting. Ball wasn't Victor's choice. The meeting was sudden, basically sprung on him. Ball's name was apparently already printed on the agreement as Victor's lawyer before they even met properly.
Oh, wow.
And the whole context was toxic. Victor was being actively misled into thinking signing these papers was his only shot at saving his marriage, while Jane secretly had divorce papers already filed. So the court said, look, this wasn't real independent advice serving Victor's interests.
So because Jane couldn't prove either fairness or genuine independent advice.
The presumption of undue influence stood. She couldn't overcome it.
So it wasn't just about seeing a lawyer. The advice had to be real, independent, helpful, and not, part of the manipulation itself.
Yeah.
Okay, after breaking down all those elements, the confidential relationship, the unfairness, the fake advice, what was the court's final conclusion? What happened with the agreement and the property?
The property settlement and separation agreement, declared null and void, gone.
And the property he transferred.
The court used its power in equity, basically, its power to do what's fair, and imposed a constructive trust. Think of it as a legal tool to undo unjust enrichment. Since Jane got the property unfairly, the court essentially said, nope, you were just holding that property for Victor.
So he got it back.
Most of it, yes.
Well,
The misgunsed home, the stock, it was ordered to be reconveyed back to him. Essentially, the court hit rewind on those transfers.
that is a powerful remedy. Okay, this idea of domination of the will is key. Francois had badgering financial control. But let's try a hypothetical to really nail the difference between okay persuasion in a marriage and this kind of will-subverting influence.
Okay, let's try one.
All right, imagine Sarah convinces her husband, Tom, they must sell their house, use all the money to buy some remote land, go off-grid for financial freedom. But Tom has a serious chronic health condition. He relies heavily on city doctors. Moving remote would be incredibly dangerous for him, maybe even life-threatening. Now imagine Sarah has spent the last year isolating Tom from friends, controlling who he talks to, maybe even blocking access to his usual doctors, telling him they're all lying to him. If Tom, totally isolated and believing Sarah knows best, signs the papers to sell the house and buy the land, is that just a terrible life choice? Or could he potentially void that contract based on undue influence?
Ah, that's a great hypothetical. It really highlights the difference. It's almost a textbook case for subversion. Remember the Francois standard. It's not just about persuasion. Spouses convince each other to move all the time, make big decisions.
Right.
The legal question is, was the decision produced by the domination of the victim's will? In your scenario, the isolation, the manipulation around his life, critical medical care, that points strongly towards Sarah establishing herself as the dominant partner in that specific context.
Because it leads to a decision directly against his own safety.
Exactly. If that dominance completely overrides his free will, making him sign away assets in a way that directly harms his vital interests, then yes, that contract is absolutely voidable. It crosses the line from bad advice or poor judgment into exploitation.
That makes the distinction really clear. Okay, this whole analysis gives us a fantastic structure. Now let's make this super practical. We've dissected Francois. Can we boil down these rules into a kind of diagnostic checklist? Something you listening could use if you're spotting issues like this, say, on a law school exam or just analyzing a situation.
Absolutely. Let's synthesize this into a clear three-step framework for spotting and analyzing undue influence, mirroring how the courts approach it. Step 1. Check relationship status. First, ask, do we have a legally defined confidential relationship? You need facts showing dominance and superiority like Jane's financial control and badgering. Critically, remember, just being married is not enough for this legal status. You have to prove the dominance.
Okay, step 1. Prove dominance for confidential relationship status.
Step 2. Burden shift. If you establish that confidential relationship and the dominant party got a benefit from the transaction, like Jane getting the house and stock, the burden of proof flips. It automatically shifts to the dominant party. They now have to prove the deal was legitimate. The weaker party doesn't have to prove they were manipulated anymore.
Step 2. Burden shifts to the dominant party. Got it.
Step 3. Test the rebuttal. Now, the dominant party has the burden. They must prove, by that high standard of clear and convincing evidence, two essential things to overcome the presumption of undue influence. First, A, the agreement was substantively fair, not financial suicide. Second, B, the weaker party received independent and genuinely helpful legal advice, not a charade.
And if they fail on either one?
If the dominant party fails to prove either fairness or genuinely independent advice, they haven't rebutted the presumption. The contract is voidable. Done.
That distinction between just getting advice versus getting genuinely helpful, independent advice really stands out. It shows the court looking past formalities to protect someone vulnerable.
Exactly. It's substance over form. The court won't just tick a box if the advice itself was tainted by the dominant party's influence or the overall coercive situation. The advice has to actually be for the subservient party's benefit, which just isn't possible if they're being emotionally manipulated into thinking signing is their only option.
Okay, so final thought for everyone listening to sort of chew on. The court here used its equitable powers, its sense of fairness, to void this deal and give Victor his property back. It stepped in to protect him from a disastrous decision made under duress. What underlying policy is really being protected here? Is it just about shielding vulnerable people from predators? Or is the court also subtly discouraging any contract made hastily, emotionally, even if between consenting adults? Where does the law draw that line on emotional manipulation in financial deals? Something to think about.
That's a great question to leave with. Where does emotional reality end and where does legal accountability begin? It's a tricky balance.
Indeed. Well, thank you for sharing these sources and walking us through this really fascinating stuff. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.